Okay, we're ready. I've got the jeans on, and I did already pin them because in this case, the way that I want to take in the jean waist is really hard to pin on myself. So I'm just going to show you what I've got going on here. First, I'm not going to go through the side seam for myriad of reasons. One, I cannot remove these rivets, so going through here is impossible. Two, it will make the pocket, which is already a little bit small, even smaller. So that just doesn't work for me. Next, I know that people sometimes will put darts right there in the waistband. I hate that. I hate it. I don't like it. It's bulky. It doesn't look good. It's not natural. So I don't do it. So instead, I do what I've got right here, which is pins, if you can jam them through. Sometimes you have to use chalk or a marking tool instead. And then kind of just pinching along that back seam as I go down, just like that. Simple as that. Now, very critical detail right here. You have to make sure that once you've pinned them, you can get them on and off. Because, especially for women, if the waist comes in too much and the zipper is not long enough, you may not be able to get them up over your hips to be able to put them back on. And since they're pants and not a skirt or a dress that maybe you could put over your head instead, this is a really key and important fitting detail right now. So you gotta pin them, pull them on, pull them off, make sure it works. Now, it's time to get seam ripping. One last thing before we get seam ripping is I want to come right out the gate and tell you the bad news. I've got 3 industrial machines threaded up to do this procedure, okay? So, disclaimer, you can do it with a domestic machine and the right needles, but it'll be tricky and kind of annoying, but you can do it. So let me walk you through the machines real quick just so that you know exactly what I'm using, okay? First, we've got my little workhorse here that I adore, this Juki. It's an 8700 classic, and it's got regular 30 tex thread and a size 80 needle. So that's just a regular straight stitch machine threaded up with a regular thread. Next, I've got my big guy, my big serger, and I've got black on it right now. I'm probably going to switch over to white for this pair of jeans, but this is going to be necessary for finishing that back seam because we don't have a flat felling machine. And finally, I've got another Saruba over here that is a slightly heavier duty machine, and that's going to have a 100 size needle in it and Tex 80 jean top stitching thread. Okay? So now you know. Now you know what I'm working with here. I'm doing this for a couple of reasons. I'm doing this because having the regular weight thread and the top stitching thread in 2 machines at the same time, it's a total luxury because going back and forth makes it really easy. And I gotta knock out this filming before we open today. And having the serger makes it easier to finish the edge cleanly and nicely without a level of bulk that may be impossible to sew through on a domestic machine. And you're gonna see all of that as we go. So let's get started. Please enjoy this early morning sunlit glow coming from behind my head. Absolutely love it. Okay, pan on down here and let's take a look. So I'm gonna mark where I've got this pinned to start so that I can take those pins out because we are going to seam rip everything. And I'm using my heat erasable pins that I love. And I'm going almost all the way down the seat. And I'll tell you right now, that's going to be a really important detail because there is a major complication with this alteration, and that is this. This alteration cannot combat one big aesthetic thing, and that is dye. Many jeans are batch dyed or dyed and then like aged or they'll make a ton of the jeans all in like a bleacher neutral undyed denim and then dye them different colors. Whatever the case is, it's a pre-made garment being dyed often after the fact. You're going to find out why that matters very shortly, because as we start to seam rip, you're going to see that everything under this stitching is a different color. And so this alteration heavily depends on getting those finicky parts hidden so that they're not ugly, to put it simply. So let's start seam ripping really just at the waistband. I'm going to take the belt loop off first, and I'm going to suggest that after you do that, you immediately put this thing someplace out safe, like pinning it to another section of the waistband. Example number 1. You see that already? Where this has been released. Look at how dark it is under there. Ooh. So we're going to continue to experience that throughout this process. But that's okay. That is okay. We will figure it out. Okay. Belt loop off. Like I said, probably going to pin it over here for posterity, somewhere out of the way, because we're not going to see him again until the very end. All right, there we go. Now, can you see my little red there and there? That's how much I'm taking in the waist. So I'm going to go at least an inch in both directions to seam rip the top and seam rip the bottom so that this waistband is fully removed from the seat of the pants. I think that's going to take, I don't know, a couple minutes. Ooh, one thing I want to show you real quick. This is a really cool one. So often jeans are made with not a locking stitch, but a chain, dear Lord. And so you see how the stitching on this side looks like normal stitching, but if you flip to the inside, you can tell that that's a single needle chain stitch right there. So if I cut a few of the stitches, either in between or from the normal stitch looking side, check this out. Oh, you're going to love this. And this keeps it nice and clean for seam ripping. We're going to go right where we just picked those stitches on this side and pull. Oh, it's going the wrong direction. Ha, that's okay. We're going to come to the other side, all the way over here. Do the same thing again. Pick a few stitches, 2 or 3 stitches right there. And then from the other side, you see that? That chain should just release all the way to where we just were. Perfection. And then on this side, the normal stitch side, same thing. If we just kind of grab a bit of it, yep, it'll come right off. Ooh, that's great. Okay, so I'm going to do that for the top and the bottom, and then I'll meet you back here. Okay, we've released this. So now it's time to go down. So we've got our waistband separated. Now we're going to take out this stitching, and that one is going to be very similar, likely again another chain stitch. So should be pretty easy. We're going to start at the top and pick our way down. Before I finish seam ripping this, I want to show you something really important. This can be very confusing in the finished product as well, so I'm going to measure it right in front of you here. The distance of the pockets from the seam can be misleading because the stitching is going to go on one side. So in this case, and this is not always the case, but each of these pockets begins, and I'm looking at this seam right there, begins about 1/8 an inch and an eighth. Yep, an inch and an eighth, and maybe about an inch and a quarter. So this side, this pocket that the stitching side is on, is further from the seam than this pocket. And that, it's pretty common. It's pretty common that whichever side the seam allowance gets flipped to and then the top stitching gets put back in on, that pocket is going to initially be further away from that center back seam, so that once the stitching is placed in, it doesn't look like it's awkwardly too far on this side or awkwardly too close to either of the pockets. So just keep an eye on that as we go further down the line. We're going to flip this back out once I finish seam ripping this to take a look again as we pin the new seat. Okay, things are getting pretty serious now. So we've got the butt busted out and separated, the waistband still hanging on but separated, and now we're getting to see that really feisty issue, which is this. You see that die? It's totally insane, right? Yeah. So we got to make sure that we cover that up in the process of doing this, which, since we're taking in, shouldn't be hard. And also, this would be a great time to remind you that jeans cannot be let out. As you can see, there are many reasons. One, there's no seam allowance. There is no fabric left in it. But two, as you can see, if there were seam allowance, we would be experiencing this die issue again. So jeans can never be let out and look exactly like they were. Other garments can. So yeah, you can add fabric. Yeah, you can add gussets. All of those answers are true, and I get asked all the time. But it doesn't look good, and we don't do it. Not as a paid service. So anyway, we're taking in. We're going to cover up that die. The real issue is when we get all the way down there, because we're going to need to make that look as seamless, as pretty as possible. And it's right down in there as you're getting kind of deep into the crack. So it's already an area where we're not necessarily wanting to draw attention. And then we've got this issue of lining up the previous die and stitching so that we don't attract more attention to that area. So now what I'm going to do is flip this inside out, and we're going to start pinning the seat and the waistband where we've marked it so that we can, imagine this, get sewing. So as you know, I've got my marks on this side of the waistband, and I'm just going to transfer them really quickly by sticking a pin straight through and then drawing that on the other side. Same thing over here, sticking the pin straight through. That's just my favorite way to transfer. Okay, perfect. Now, let's take a quick measurement. It looks like we're going to take the waist in about 1 3/4 inch. Perfect. Great. Now, we're going to do something terrifying. We are going to cut. So, big thing with this alteration is you are going to make a new seam in the waistband. There's no way to avoid it. If you pinch it, it'll be way too bulky, and then you'll have to choose a side to push it to. You just do have to cut it. You have to cut it, each one, inside waistband, outside waistband, then press each of the seam allowances open, then tuck those seam allowances into the edges so that they can be top stitched back together after we do the seat. And there's just no way around it. So we're going to hide that little seam that we're going to create under the belt loop. There's almost always a belt loop there. If there isn't, you're just going to have a new seam. So that's that. Okay. So let's get cutting. And really, you can be as precise as you want about this. I, on the other hand, can see the previous die from where the belt loop was stitched on, so I can see where the center of the waistband is. And that looks to be about here. And my 2 red marks are here and here. And so I'm just going to get wild with it and, wing it, right? Yeah, we're gonna do it. Ah, done. And then directly under it without even moving my hands, same thing in the other space. All right, and just cut a waistband in half. Hope you meant it. Hope you're committed because, well, now it doesn't matter. You are committed. We are committed together. All right. So this is what it looks like. It looks even more insane if possible. And now, what I'd like to do is jump down to the seat before we finish pinning the waistband because that, with these connected, it's a little bit harder to maneuver down here. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, if you have a flat felled seam back here, which is pretty common. This edge was actually serged in these jeans, but if you have a flat felled seam, you might notice that you have half an inch, half an inch is a lot, maybe a quarter of an inch longer on one side than the other. If that is the case for you, see how I'm lining that up there? You want to make sure that you keep that distance. You want to keep that spacing of a quarter of an inch longer on one side if you had a flat felled seam that was wrapped and wrapped like that. Okay. I had a serged seam, so I'm actually going to match them up. But don't worry, we're going to look at the outside roughly 100 times before we actually sew this. So I'm going to start pinning together right at the yoke seam. The yoke seam is going to be the hardest part to match up because it's a lot of fabric to sew through. So that's definitely going to be the hardest on your machine. We're going to have to work the hand wheel on that one. But getting that pinned together and lined up is going to really help us get everything else aligned well. Now, I'm going to take a look at my red marks that I created from the outside on both edges of the garment. And you are welcome to transfer them into the inside because I can see them. I'm just going to go ahead and line them up and pin down. Now, make sure that this seam looks nice and curved as you're pinning it. You're welcome to draw it in. You're welcome to use 1,000 pins to put it in. But the seat is curved. The seat is not a straight seam. So if it looks straight to you, it probably isn't gonna look quite right when it's on, okay? So just be aware of that. All right, we're starting to get this nice little curve going here. I'm gonna look for more of my red dots up there. There they are. Even though we're taking in the waist 2 inches, we're gonna ease out pretty quickly on the rest of the pant. So we're not gonna take 2 inches in all the way down, obviously. We're gonna make that merge out nice and smooth. Okay, I've got enough pinned there for me to be happy. I'm going to check my yoke seams one more time. Great. But now is probably one of the harder parts. Let me pick some of this previous stitching out. Sorry. Let's get a few more of those threads. All right. Let's see if I can hold this up for you to see. Yep, there you go. All right. So first, this is how close the pockets are together. That is definitely something to be aware of. In this case, I'm going to take even less. I'm going to take less than I pinned because I want those to be a little bit further apart. And for most people, it's the waist fitting perfectly that they want. The seat is a little bit more negotiable, especially with women because we have hips. So I'm going to let that out a little bit more to bring those a little bit further apart. Great. Now, this is also the time when you want to look at this spacing again and see how far does that need to be away from the seam for putting the stitching back in to look good. And this is the side it was originally pressed to, so that's the side I'm going to press it back to, which means I might let out a little bit more on this side versus this side. Okay, now let's travel down and let's get to this part. This is the messy part. You see? Because what we're wanting to do, can you see my finger moving right there? What we're wanting to do is take enough of this in so that we can barely see the dye, but it won't be even on both sides. We have to artificially take in this side a little bit more to cover more of that and not make it, at the same time, not make it too tight. So let's come back to the inside again. I'm going to seam rip a little bit more to get it further down, because that's the other trick, is hiding it further into the crotch so that it's harder for anyone else to see. Great, let's do that. Okay. As you're looking at this, you see where my top stitching is still connected on the outside? Great. And I'm going to flip the pin over to this side so that you can see it. You can see where my pin is just on the edge of where the die is. That's one great thing about this, is that you can see the die from the inside and out. Now, on this side, notice that that pin is not even touching the die? That's what I mean by it is unbalanced. So I'm going to put my pin right there at the edge of the die, and then I'm going to go into this trough. Do you see where my finger is right there? That is where the top stitching will be closest to the seam, and that is where we need to run this seam before we even consider top stitching, so that we can stitch, close, and press this area and make it smooth and make it transition well. Let's flip to the outside and see what that looks like, okay? Okay. Hard to see with it pinned, all right? I know that. So instead, let me just show you that that's what mine looks like when it's pinned. And a lot of the magic is going to come after we put the stitch in and go and press it on the iron. So let's go get that stitch in. All right, we're over at the machine. This is our regular needle, regular weight of thread machine. And we're simply going to stitch that seat seam back in, the one that we just pinned, okay? And I'm probably on a stitch length of about 2.5 here. The hardest part of this sewing is going to be getting over these two yokes and making them line up. So I'm going to check a bunch of times as I'm getting close. And just moving the pants as we go. All right, now as we're getting down to the bottom, I want to get real close here, so I'm going to change this angle. Okay. Now, I think I'm going to flip over to the other side of the pant to do this. So let's take that out and go like this instead. I'm going to take that pin out as well. You can see again the trough and where the stitching, this stitching is still holding the seat together. That's where I did not seam rip. And we're trying to put the needle directly on top of that stitching, but without any pinches of fabric getting in the way. And then we're arcing out from that seam through the die as smoothly as we can to match back up with the stitching we have already just put in. Okay? Okay. We have a butt again. This is the inside. We're going to flip the legs back out. There's a lot of flipping with this one. And I'm going to use my ham, my little cutie pressing ham, to get this seat pressed exactly right. So I want to I'm going to go down and look at the area that is still sewn and see which direction the seam allowance is pressed. In the case of jeans, the seam allowance is always going to be pressed to one side. I don't think I've ever seen a pair of jeans where it wasn't pressed to one side versus pressed open. So if you have that, it's just weird, but you won't, okay? So you're going to pick your side right now for the pressing part of this procedure. So come in close. Don't be shy. You see this? You see that right there? I know. And here's the worst news of all. That is what it looks like. This alteration is not perfect. Okay. They say something in the army. They say, don't let perfection be the enemy of good. And in this case, I think I'd say don't let perfection be the enemy of great. This is not going to look exactly the way that it did when we started. It's going to look very close, but it's not going to look exactly the same because that is just how alterations work. They are magical, but they're not, it's not like real magic. So this is the way it's going to look. If you want these jeans to fit, this is the best way. But it's going to be just great. Okay? All right. Come on back down. So I've got my seam allowance pressed to one side. I'm feeling around. And I'm moving my hand. And when I get down to this section, that's where I really want to make sure that everything is smooth and at least sitting well, barring the fact that we just can't seem to move. Can't seem to move that die. Ooh, okay. Now, I've been spending so much time in the crotch that I did not get this lined up. You see that? Lining that up makes a big difference. I am going to have to sew that one more time. So I'm going to seam rip that area and re-sew that right now to match that back up, okay? And then we'll be ready to move on. Alrighty. Now, if you are satisfied with the way that seat is looking, and really, I think you should be. I think it's good. Then you are ready to finish that edge. So if you have a machine that can handle double turning denim, you are welcome to do kind of a rolled, pressed in place flat felt before putting the top stitching back in. I don't prefer to do it that way. I feel like it's bulky and I would much rather just put, I would much rather serge it. So I am gonna use my serger and serge this end, this seam on the seat all the way up, and then come over here and press it one more time before putting the top stitching back in. And yes, I am doing the entire seat before I jump back to the waistband. So that is what's going on here, okay? I'm gonna go serge this and then we'll be ready to top stitch. I am lining the stitching up with this side of my presser foot, which is going to leave me about half an inch, so 3/4 of an inch, I'm sorry, a full inch of seam allowance if you add half and half and you were to let it back out, for instance. Fabulous. Ooh, that's pretty. That is beautiful. Okay, we are ready to top stitch from the outside now. Now, continuing this game of musical machines, we are back over at, we're over at a new machine that has a size 100 needle and our 80 tex thread. And the reason that I am sewing this before finishing the waistband is just honestly so that the beginning of the stitching can be hidden back in that stitch and it'll just look nicer. So I'm just gonna finish that up totally and make sure you're pressing your seam allowance to the correct side before you do this. And I'm gonna go a slightly longer stitch on this, probably a stitch length of 3. And then I'm trying to put the edge, so that seam directly in the center of my presser foot as I'm stitching down. And then I'll come back to do the second line using the first line as a guide. So let's just make sure everything looks nice and straight. Yes, great. And I'm pulling this apart and making sure that the yolks align. As I get close to the yolks, I'm going to do what I always do, which is kind of lift the presser foot frequently just to make sure that no fabric gets pushed at a different rate than other fabric and screws up the stitching. Yeah, let's make sure. Yeah, that's looking good. Good, good, good. The last thing we want to do at this stage is have to go back and restitch because this seam looks way better without any noticeable start and stops on it. So definitely try to get this all in one go. And then I'm going all the way down, directly over top of that area of stitching. I'm sorry, of that previous area of stitching, and lining it directly up, you can see, with. Great. All right. Now I'm going to take that out and look at it. It looks pretty straight if you ignore the dye situation, but it does. So now let's come back up and do the second one. And coming up to that finish. Great. All right, let's go see what it looks like. Okay, so far so good. Waistband still disconnected, but this is what the seat is looking like. So we just finished that top stitching. As you come down, yes, you can see the transition there, but hopefully that will be hidden enough by our booty and the wearing that it will be all right. And again, as you wear the jeans, the aging will wear back in. That is the great thing about jeans. So yes, this will look a little fresh, let's say, when it's first completed, but as you wear them, it'll get more loved, used, worn in, whatever you want to say. So now let's get these back together. You can start with whichever side you want, inside or outside, just don't connect the wrong ones. I'm just gonna grab these two outer pieces. And again, we're using those red marks or whatever kind of mark you originally made. I remember us taking the measurement as well at about 1 3/4. So as long as I'm taking that from each side, half of that from each side, we know that we'll have it right. So flattening out those seam allowances and pinning that together. And then honestly, while I'm here, I think I'll take the other two and pin those together as well. And very important, remember, correct sides together. Correct sides together. And then we'll do a quick stitch and come directly back over here to the sewing, the ironing board so that we can get these pressed up and reset and top stitched. You're getting very, very close here. There we are. Alrighty. Perfect. Let's go sew both of those up. Okay, we are stitched up and ready to roll. One other really important detail when you're sewing that. The sewing itself seems simple, right? But it's all of these lines I gotta match up. See, another dye line. This one is going to be folded under here. We're gonna press that down so that we can get that waistband back on, but these need to line up as well so that when we reattach this waistband on all 4 of them, this will look, see, that one's a teensy bit off, but that one's on the inside, so I think I'm gonna leave it. But those all need to really be lined up. Okay, let's pop down here. I'm still using my ham to do this ironing because I really like the curve of it. everything about pants, jeans especially, is curved because that's how we're shaped. So I love using the hand to press even something that seems flat like this. All right, so I am pushing the seam allowances out and pushing the seam allowance I just sewed flat and open. You see? Let's press that first. Now I'm going to press these in. So I pressed it flat and out first, and then in, in. And this is tricky. So probably one at a time. And yes, I know that I'm pressing the other waistband directly underneath. There's just no good way to get that out of the way. So, yes, it's just getting pressed down there, and we will worry about him later. There we go. There we go. Just trying to get that as close to where it looks like that original stitching was as possible. Fabulous. Love it. Okay. And now flip into the outside to do exactly the same thing. And trying to move it away from the waist. I'm sorry, the seat if I can. Nice and flat. And then again, while it's hot, I'm going to pop that down. And now I'm actually trying to set that directly on top of the waistband below it. Ooh, that's looking good. And same thing down here, pressing the waistband below it up and pressing this waistband out. And now I'm looking at the outer waistband, the one that's actually going to be viewable to other people right now. So I really want to make sure that that looks good. Really nice. Pressing that in place. Okay. And now it's just time to insert our waistband. I'm going to cut a few threads here and grab my pins, and we'll get that pinned up. Okay, so now we're trying to shove this waistband in. The waistband, especially in jeans today, has a tendency to get stretched out because usually we're working with blends, maybe not necessarily all cotton, but we want to get this seam as best we can, the seat seam, lined up with that seam we created in the waistband. But we also need to evenly distribute any kind of excess material as we're pinning. Now, there is a lot of facets to this. One, like I said, the waistband may have gotten a little bit stretched out. So it's going to feel like we're putting too much in there, but we're going to ease it in and make it work. Two, you've got to cover as much of those uh, dyed areas as we possibly can. And that's why pressing the waistband out and getting it all lined up, especially on the top and bottom here, are so essential because we're going to just put one stitch straight through. All right. And we want it to be a good one. We want it to line up. So we're just going to do as much as we can to make this pinned perfectly before we go sit down at that top stitch machine, or the machine loaded up with top stitch thread. My apologies. So you see what I'm doing here. I'm easing it in, stretching where needed to make it fit, and then looking at the inside to make sure that those pins are catching all of the layers. This is going to be some of the hardest sewing that your machine is going to have to do because, yes, if you've counted, you know we're about to ask that machine to sew through five layers of denim. Each waistband is folded on itself, and then we've got the pants sandwiched in between. So yes, 5 layers of denim. God help us. But don't worry, it's going to work. All right, now I'm pressing to just kind of like ease and make everyone feel happy and comfortable. I'm checking my pins one more time. And then one other note here, when I did do the waistband internal stitch and a lot of the internal stitching that I'm doing, I am just using my regular weight thread. I don't like having the additional weight and bulk of the top stitching thread inside the machine. So, or inside of the pant. I do not suggest that you use both. I really do suggest that you switch back and forth between internal seams and visible external seams that need the top stitching, but do your functional stitching, if at all possible, with the regular weight thread because it's more maneuverable, it's less bulky, and your machine is probably most comfortable with it. Okay, let's get this top stitching in and that belt loop back on and be done. All right, like I said, trying to do it in one go. Let's see if we can do it. Obviously, we're going to start on top of our previous stitching, and as usual, we are never going to run over pins, so I'm going to start removing them immediately as we start going. And you really want to get directly through that dyed area where we know the stitching used to be. All right, I'm checking to make sure these sides are lined up as well, because again, I really want the stitching to look beautiful from both sides, inside and out. I really, really, really want that. All right, as we go over the seam hump where we also have other seam allowances pressed open, ooh, this is going to be hard. That's where that big needle comes into play. Again, I'm using a 100 here. And then just a few top stitches when we meet back up. And then let's look and see. Yes, that looks beautiful. That looks beautiful. All right, let's jump down to the bottom. I like closing up the top first. I don't know that it matters. It's just a personal preference. So that's how I start. And again, we want to make sure that there's no wrinkles on the pant side as we are inserting it back in. And I'm going to use this little piggy, this little pointer finger, to feel the seam allowance and the waistband underneath here, because I really want this matching edge, the one that I can see, underneath the one I can't see, to be lined up so that the stitching is going straight through all of those layers and it's going to be beautiful on both sides. So I'm feeling for that seam allowance to make sure that these edges are matched up. Over here, it's easy because I can see it. Over here, I can't see it, so not quite so easy. And just gently feeding that in. Not too slow, but not too fast. And again, going over that hump with all those seams, that is the hardest part. And just meeting back up. Perfect. Okay. I love it. I love it. I love it. Look at how beautiful. Okay, now the final test. Ooh. Oh, a little bit of thread there. But this one, that's the one we just put in. And it catches all the way through. And no fraying here. We want to make sure that the doubled over edge is caught completely. That's really, really, really important because these jeans are going to be heavily washed and worn. All right, I'm going to cut a few of these threads and then let's get that belt loop back on. Okay, looking fabulous. Yay, yay, yay. And don't worry, I am going to put them back on. Now, I know I said that was going to be some of the hardest sewing that your machine was going to do, but I lied a little bit. Putting the belt loop back on. So imagine this. You've already got like the 5 layers of denim on the pant that we discussed. Now you're going to add 2 more. This folded over edge and the belt loop itself. So is it 7? If it's 7, let's just like la 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 la. Let's just pretend that we can't hear that. So you have a choice right now. Sometimes if I really feel like, oh my gosh, the machine is struggling, I might go drop down and go back to my regular weight thread. But if I think I'm feeling good with the heavyweight thread, I might just do it here. What I'm doing is picking out the little remainder bits that were in the belt loop when I seam ripped it earlier because I just want it to be clean. I want it to be clean and beautiful. And if I wasn't able to get a perfect thread match, I don't want the new thread over top of the thread bits looking not only messy, but not matching. So I'm literally going to slap this baby down and just put it on. You can try to pin it. It's not going to work. I'm sorry. No, I don't mean to be negative. You can definitely try to pin it. There's absolutely no way that you will, though. So just hold it, okay? So now, I'm going to place this directly. Come on over. I'm going to place this directly over top of the seam that I created and try to stitch that in place. I would suggest lining up the top first and sewing that, and then just coming straight down to do the bottom, because then sometimes if you start with the bottom, the top isn't properly aligned, and again, it's just another like you're going back and forth, it doesn't look great. All right, and I'm going to use the hand wheel. So I'm turning the hand wheel to get started here just to feel the layers. And yes, I think my Go baby go, little machine is feeling okay today. Now I'm gonna try to reverse it, but please, for the love of God, go really slow here because it's just a lot of layers. And a bad angle can bend or break the needle. It can just do a lot of damage. So be gentle. Now come straight down, little bit of room. Leave a little bit of room because, of course, a belt is going through here. So don't go really tight. And then we are hoping that the stitching on this belt loop is going to align perfectly with the stitching that we put back into the seat. And again, same thing. This is nice. It's a little less thick down here, so that's great. And I'm going back and forth 1, 2, 3 times. That's it. Then I'm going to look at the other side, make sure that that stitching still looks clean. Of course, it will be visible. So really, it's just about clipping those threads and making it look pretty. Yes. And let's see. Ooh, so natural, so nice, looking great. All right, let's put them on. Alrighty. What are we thinking? What are we thinking? All the angles. Got to see all the angles. I know it's a little vulgar, but you want to look at that die. Make sure you're happy with the way it looks, the stitching, the alignment of the pockets right here, the stitching all the way up, the waistband. How does it fit? How does it look? And I think it's going to work. Yay. This was a fun one. This is a hard one. Man, the dye is really interesting, but jeans are worth it. I mean, we all agree. The jeans are worth it. Try again and again. Don't let perfection be the enemy of great. You can do this one. I know that you can. Best alteration of all time. I know I always say that, but it's true. Thank you so much. Ask me tons of questions, and I'll see you at the next one.